I never imagined I would say those words about Adrian Brooks. For 3 years, he had been the one person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. When people asked about us, I always answered with confidence, almost pride. We were steady. We were real. At least, that was what I believed. Looking back now, I realized that the moment everything started to unravel was much quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic fight, no sudden confession. Instead, it was a series of small moments that didn't quite fit together, like pieces from different puzzles forced into the same picture. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and for most of my adult life I believed that loyalty was the strongest form of love. I worked as a graphic designer at a small creative studio downtown, where long hours and endless projects were the norm. My life was simple, structured, and mostly predictable. Adrian was the one thing in my life that felt spontaneous and exciting. That we met 3 years earlier at a modest art exhibition hosted in a renovated warehouse. I had gone there with a coworker who insisted the event would inspire new ideas for my work. Instead, what caught my attention was a tall man with dark hair standing near a collection of abstract paintings. Adrian had this effortless confidence about him, the kind that made people naturally gravitate toward him. That he noticed me staring at one of the paintings and made a comment about how it looked like chaos pretending to be art. I laughed, mostly because his honesty was refreshing. That conversation turned into another, and then another. By the end of the evening we were sitting outside on the steps of the building, talking like we had known each other for years. Adrian was charming in a way that felt genuine. He listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke about life with a kind of bold optimism that I found contagious. When he asked if I wanted to meet again for coffee, I didn't hesitate. Our relationship grew naturally after that. Coffee dates turned into dinners, dinners turned into weekends together, and before long Adrian had become part of every routine in my life. He worked in marketing, which meant his schedule was often unpredictable, but he always seemed to make time for us. Friends often commented on how balanced we seemed as a couple. Adrian brought energy and confidence, while I brought calm and stability. We complemented each other in ways that felt effortless. On quiet evenings we would sit on the couch watching movies, sharing sarcastic commentary about the plot. On weekends we explored small neighborhoods around the city, discovering cafes and bookstores neither of us had noticed before. Those small moments built the foundation of something I believed would last. For a long time, nothing about our relationship felt uncertain. Adrian talked about the future easily. Sometimes he would mention traveling together or finding a bigger apartment someday. Whenever he spoke like that, I felt reassured that we were moving forward together, but somewhere along the way, subtle changes began to appear. At first they were easy to ignore. Adrian started coming home later than usual, explaining that work had become more demanding. I understood the pressure of deadlines, so I didn't question it. In fact, I tried to be supportive. I cooked dinner more often and made sure the apartment felt comfortable whenever he finally walked through the door. Still, I noticed small things that didn't quite match the explanations he gave. Adrian began checking his phone more frequently, often smiling slightly before locking the screen again. When I asked what he was looking at, he usually answered with something vague about work messages or group chats. One night while we were watching a movie, his phone buzzed repeatedly on the coffee table. Adrian glanced at the screen, picked it up quickly, and stepped into the hallway to respond. It wasn't the action itself that bothered me. Everyone deserves privacy. But there was something about the speed of his reaction that stayed in my mind long after the movie ended. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Adrian seemed distracted during conversations, as if part of his attention was somewhere else. Sometimes I would catch him staring at his phone with a thoughtful expression before quickly putting it away when I entered the room. Each time it happened, I told myself I was overthinking things. Trust had always been the foundation of our relationship, and I didn't want to damage that by assuming the worst. Adrian had never given me a reason to doubt him before. It felt unfair to suddenly question his honesty because of a few small changes. Still, the feeling lingered. One evening Adrian came home later than usual, dropping his keys onto the kitchen counter with a tired sigh. I asked how his day had been, and he gave a short answer about a stressful meeting before heading straight to the shower. His phone remained on the counter beside the sink, the screen lighting up briefly as a message arrived that I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. In fact, I almost looked away immediately. But the screen stayed lit long enough for my eyes to catch a single line of text. The sender's name was Lucas. That I had never heard Adrian mention anyone by that name before. For a moment I stood there, telling myself it was probably a coworker or a new client. The explanation seemed simple enough. Still, curiosity crept in quietly, urging me to glance once more at the message preview. The words were short, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Last night meant more than you think. My chest tightened as the meaning of that sentence settled in. I stared at the glowing screen, hoping I had misunderstood something, hoping there was a harmless explanation waiting somewhere in the background, but the longer I stood there, the harder it became to convince myself of that. I in the bathroom, the sound of running water echoed softly through the hallway. Adrian was only a few steps away, completely unaware of the storm of questions forming in my mind. For the first time in 3 years, doubt entered our relationship like an unwelcome guest, and in that moment, I realized something I had never considered before. Maybe the man I trusted more than anyone else was hiding something from me. The words on Adrian Brooks's phone refused to leave Ethan Caldwell's mind. Last night meant more than you think. The message replayed itself again and again in Ethan's thoughts while the sound of running water echoed from the bathroom. His first instinct was to look away and pretend he had seen nothing, but the uneasy feeling in his chest made that impossible. For 3 years Ethan had trusted Adrian without hesitation, and now that trust felt fragile. He stepped back from the kitchen counter just as the bathroom door opened. Adrian walked out with a towel around his shoulders, his hair still damp. He looked relaxed, almost casual, the way someone looks when nothing in their world feels complicated. Ethan tried to keep his expression normal. How was the meeting? Ethan asked. Adrian shrugged slightly as he reached for his phone. Long. Everyone wanted something different. You know how it is. His answer was quick, practiced. Adrian glanced at the screen, and for a brief moment Ethan noticed a faint smile appear before Adrian locked the phone and placed it in his pocket. That smile made the message echo even louder in Ethan's mind. The rest of the evening passed with quiet tension. They ate dinner together, but the conversation felt thin. Adrian talked about marketing campaigns and upcoming deadlines, yet his attention seemed divided. Several times his phone buzzed, and each time he checked it quickly before turning the screen away. Ethan tried to convince himself that nothing had changed, but the small details kept building. Adrian laughed softly at something on his phone while Ethan was washing dishes. A few minutes later he stepped onto the balcony to take a call, speaking in a low voice that Ethan could barely hear through the glass door. Ethan dried his hands slowly, watching Adrian's silhouette outside. The man he had trusted for years suddenly felt distant, almost unfamiliar. That night Ethan lay awake long after Adrian had fallen asleep beside him. The quiet of the apartment gave his thoughts too much room to wander. He replayed every recent memory, searching for signs he might have missed. Adrian working late. Adrian smiling at messages. Adrian stepping away to answer calls. Each moment felt small on its own, yet together they formed a pattern Ethan couldn't ignore anymore. By morning, the doubt had settled deeply. Over the next few days Ethan tried to act normally, but his awareness sharpened. He began noticing details he would have overlooked before. Adrian started leaving the apartment earlier than usual, claiming he wanted to beat traffic on the way to work. Some evenings he returned home energized rather than exhausted, as if his long days were somehow exciting. One Friday night Adrian came home later than expected again. Ethan had been sitting on the couch scrolling through design ideas on his laptop when the door finally opened. You're still awake? Adrian asked with mild surprise. I was waiting for you, Ethan replied. Adrian placed his keys on the table and loosened his jacket. Work dinner ran longer than planned. The explanation sounded simple, yet Ethan noticed something unusual. Adrian seemed restless, pacing slightly before sitting down. Ethan studied him carefully. Who's Lucas? Ethan asked. The room went silent. Adrian froze for a fraction of a second before turning his head slowly. What? Lucas, Ethan repeated. The name on your phone. For a moment Adrian said nothing. His expression shifted from confusion to caution. He's just someone I know, Adrian said finally. From work? Something like that. The vagueness in Adrian's answer felt deliberate. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. I saw the message the other night, Ethan said. The one that said last night meant more than you think. Adrian's shoulders stiffened. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The tension in the room felt heavy, pressing against the silence. You looked at my phone? Adrian said quietly. I saw the message on the screen, Ethan replied. I wasn't trying to spy on you. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. You're overthinking this. Then explain it. Another pause followed, longer than the first. Adrian stood up and walked toward the kitchen as if he needed distance from the conversation. Ethan watched him carefully, waiting for an answer that would make sense of everything, but Adrian didn't look relieved or confident. He looked conflicted. It's complicated, Adrian said at last. Ethan felt a sharp wave of disappointment. It shouldn't be, he replied. Adrian leaned against the counter, avoiding eye contact. Lucas is just someone I met recently. Recently? Ethan asked. Yeah. And the message? Adrian hesitated again. That hesitation told Ethan more than any explanation could. The realization spread slowly through him, heavy and painful. You've been seeing him, Ethan said. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead he stared down at the floor, the silence stretching longer with every second. Finally he exhaled quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The words felt like confirmation. Ethan sat back against the couch, trying to absorb what he had just heard. His chest tightened as the reality settled in. 3 years of trust suddenly felt fragile, as if the foundation beneath their relationship had cracked without warning. How long? Ethan asked. That Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. A few weeks. The answer echoed in Ethan's mind. Weeks, not a single mistake. Not a misunderstanding. Something that had been happening quietly while Ethan believed everything between them was fine. Ethan looked at Adrian, searching for the man he thought he knew. I didn't expect this from you, Ethan said slowly. You crossed every limit we had. Adrian finally looked up, his expression filled with regret, but Ethan couldn't tell whether that regret came from guilt or simply from being confronted. The room felt colder than before. For the first time since their relationship began, Ethan realized he might not truly know Adrian Brooks at all, and somewhere beyond the walls of that apartment, there was another man named Lucas whose presence had already changed everything.